got Chad Urbshott on the podcast with us. He's the owner of Equigrowth Capital. They specialize in investing in non-performing notes and kind of turning those notes around. So today we're going to be talking about Chad, your business, and kind of how you got started, and a little bit about your success and kind of the strategy you use to do that, and also possibly talk about it. If someone wants to invest with you and work with you, they can do that. So
Okay.
you've been featured on numerous podcasts, numerous shows, and it's an honor as well as a pleasure to have you on tonight, and super excited to get started. So
Cool.
yeah, let's talk a little bit about Equigrowth and kind of what you guys are doing with it.
Yeah, so so I started note investing I started dabbling in it 2015, I believe it was. Kind of started off with partnering up with someone that had already been doing the note business for a little while, I guess. Well, truth be told, I found out later that I wouldn't say I was one of the guinea pigs investors, but he didn't have as much experience as I thought.
Sure.
But back in those days, you could buy, buying stuff like pennies on the dollar. Well, not pennies on the dollar, but 30 to 40 cents of,
Right.
either the value or the unpaid balance. And so back in those days, you could make a lot of mistakes and still make money.
Right.
So when I partnered up, I wanted to kind of learn the business and, eventually go out and, direct my company and start doing that full time. And what I learned was what not to do in the business. So after I think we did about a half a dozen deals together, and after about a year and a half or 2 years, I think it was, I realized, man, if I think I could probably do this business, as well, or at least as well as the person that was doing it. So, but how I originally got started in it was prior to that. It was about end of 2012, 2013. We were buying foreclosures like right at the auctions. This is in Florida, like South Florida,
Mhm.
and that was about the time. The recession had been, a couple years in at that point, and that's when all the hedge funds started buying. That was when, like, Warren Buffett said, if I could buy 200,000 homes or whatever the number was, he would buy them. Or if he had $2 billion or whatever, I can't remember the exact number was, he'd buy as many houses as he could, and that kind of sparked the hedge fund industry into buying homes for rentals. And as you're probably well aware, there's quite a few out there that hold tens of thousands of rental properties now. So what they were doing is they're coming in to these foreclosure auctions and buying these foreclosures at basically like retail prices. Like, it was insane how much they were paying. And back in the day, like I said, it was around 2015. It was another guy that I was partnered up with, and we were doing some turnkey rentals and what have you, and doing some flips. And he I was complaining or whatever, saying to him, like, it's insane how much these hedge funds are paying for these foreclosures. He said, well, why don't you look into buying the mortgage from the bank beforehand, buy the note beforehand. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, it was like a foreign concept to me. I had no idea that you could actually buy the mortgages from the banks before they even got to the foreclosure. So at that point in time, it was like a kind of a light bulb went off, and I embarked upon a bit of an educational journey to find out a bit more about that. And and that's when it was a meetup group I think I went to, where this guy was touting exactly what I'd been researching for the previous 6 months or whatever it was, like how to become the bank and take over the mortgage. And then a transition from, like I said, partner with this person in 2017, just went full time into buying notes. So, and
Nice.
yeah.
So did you start out, like you specialize in non-performing notes? Do you start out buying the non-performing notes, or is that something you kind of just geared towards eventually?
Yeah. I had not even thought about buying performing notes at that time. Truth be told, then, you could actually buy performing notes. Like, that's kind of how green it was. So I didn't think a bank would want to sell a loan that was perfectly fine, but
Right.
it turns out that they sell them all the time, right? So
Sure.
yeah, I was kind of jumped into the deep end with buying non-performing notes. And my strategy at the time was, like, back in 2015 to 17, was, since I was so fixated on buying foreclosures, my mindset back in those days was to take the property, and that's basically all I thought about doing, was just buying this note, so that we could continue. And it was usually already in the foreclosure process, some of the ones that are buying. So the intent was just to take it through foreclosure. Well, it wasn't long after that I realized that a lot of times these don't actually make it to the foreclosure sale. And with my experience in buying foreclosures and being at auctions, I should have known that a lot of times these people declare bankruptcy.
Right.
And, out of the first, I don't know, probably dozen that we bought, probably 2 or 3 of them went to declare bankruptcy. And I was like, oh man, that's a whole new world that I didn't, I knew it existed, I just didn't know what it entailed at the time. But
Sure.
yeah, so that was definitely a learning experience, which, there's a lot of learning experiences in this business. So I found out over the years, and still learning. Like, I still get curveballs thrown at me almost weekly.
Right,
So,
right. It's a
yeah,
lot of information. It's a very, very fragmented industry.
yeah,
But
yeah, definitely.
yeah, so I mean, so it looks like you kind of like right now, you mentioned, you were buying people who were close to bankruptcy, that type of thing. I mean, right now you kind of have like a process. I notice you kind of have like a 4-step acquisition process. You got your indicative bid, you got your due diligence, your final pricing, contract, closing, and servicing, transfer. I mean, can we talk, I guess, a little bit about how you're sourcing deals now to kind of avoid maybe those pitfalls you started out with?
Yeah, so I would say that sourcing deals. So up until before the pandemic, the pricing on notes has been gradually increasing more and more and more ever since
Yes.
I got into this business. And I got into it way later than, the most, some of the big institutions out there that have been around since, even before the recession began, like the Great Recession, not the pandemic recession. But like back in the day when I started, you could still buy stuff anywhere between, I would guess, like 30 cents on the dollar is kind of about the lowest, to about 50 to 60 cents. And back, a few years back, there was, I would say, a handful of people that was regularly buying deals from. One gentleman in particular, he was helping to liquidate a couple of hedge funds that were, I don't know if they were getting out of the business or they were just winding down some of their funds, and picked up, I would say, over 50% of the deals from this one guy in particular, this one broker that was really well known. And as I started buying more from him, he was starting to, I wouldn't call it spoon feeding, but, giving me some pretty good deals or access to deals that he hadn't sent out to the general public yet.
Right.
So unfortunately, the funds he was representing, I guess they had wound down their funds, and so he doesn't have a heck of a lot left anymore. And there was a couple sellers back then as well, where I was buying, the odd ones and twosies here, small pools from. So those particular sellers that I was buying, just the odd one here and there from, I've actually gone back to them again recently and been picking up a lot more from, because they've always had inventory, but the pricing was always high. But I've found with them as well that, the more you buy from them, I wouldn't say the better deal you're going to get, but they're giving you better opportunities. So,
Sure.
you might be pricing the same, but, the deal itself is a little sweeter. So, so I don't know if that actually answers your question. I think you're asking about how the deal flow works, but, and being in the business for a number of years, developed some other sources as well. Just going to conferences, I speak at the conference here and there, and just getting to know some of the other, players in the industry, some of the bigger players, some of the institutional funds, and so yeah, picking up some stuff from them. So yeah, it's I wouldn't say it's gone full circle, but like, I've gone back to some of the original sellers, and a couple of them I actually swore I would never buy from again, just because of some of
Prices.
their prices. And one seller in particular has he's a little bit unscrupulous with his selling practices, but
Right.
it's like you got to keep going back to the trough again if you want to be fed. So
Yeah, you always got to keep that deal flow, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, so it's interesting. It's this, I would say, since the beginning of the summer, the deal flow I wouldn't say completely dried up. Still getting a lot of stuff to bid, but the pricing expectations were just like so astronomically high. I would throw numbers at them, not throw it, like have a pretty sophisticated pricing modeler, but I just knew going in that I don't stand a chance on some of these. But yeah, the reputation with some of the, I've got some of the sellers that I can buy smaller pools from, or ones and twosies, still have it there. So it's nice to be able to still pick up the odd deal here and there from them. So
Sure, sure. Yeah, I was shocked just how much people were offering me for the notes that I sell. I don't always sell notes, but when I hold on to them, but sometimes I'll post something and kind of see what people will give me for it. But it was
yeah,
unbelievable. Like you said, over the past 12 months, it's been people just kind of buying almost anything, which is
yeah,
making harder to source deals, I'm sure, as an investor. But yeah, I mean,
right.
also the bigger time players seem to kind of be peeling off just a little bit, and this is the price we're going to pay. We're going to stick to it. It's smart.
Yeah, I actually just sold a couple reperformers. I guess it was last week the deal closed, and it was a bigger institution than I am, and they paid like 85 cents to 90 cents on the dollar, and these are reperforming loans. So
Wow.
yeah,
Wow.
I
Yeah.
was quite shocked. It was
Yeah.
a lot
Hey, it's
higher than
good
I
for
was
you,
expecting.
right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. So, but the problem is what do you replace that with, right? Like I think
Exactly.
those are
Yeah.
non-performers, and I'm pretty sure we picked them up at like 50 cents on the dollar or something like that. So
Right.
yeah,
That's a
so
nice spread,
yes,
you know.
yeah, the return on those were like over 100%. So can't complain.
Sure,
Yeah,
sure. So yeah, I
yeah.
mean, just to go back to, I guess, if you can, just like you said, you have a pretty in-depth pricing calculator. I mean, is that something that you just kind of tracked over time, like kind of started doing deals, and how did you, I guess, you develop that pricing calculator when you're making that acquisition?
Yeah, it literally started with one sheet on a spreadsheet, and it's evolved into like dozens and dozens of sheets. So I can load in as from one to I don't know how many to go up to. I can vary it based on the number of deals, but I think the highest it'll go up is like 75 right now. But so I
Wow.
can load in all the data from a mortgage, like a tape, and it'll price them all out. Basically, with the click of a button. Um, yeah, it's just been and I still, update it like almost daily still. Like there's still, tweaks and stuff that go into it. So, but yeah,
Sure.
it's completely loaded with macros, and it's got a front end summary with, a bunch of buttons you can click. And as a matter of fact, I just submitted a bid on a pool right before we hop on this podcast. So, yeah, it's just been a work in progress, and it's basically the learning experience over the years. Like, man, I wish I'd have thought of that going into this. You buy a deal and you're like, oh, I never knew about that, or I didn't see this coming. So yeah, it's just been adding to it and adding to it and adding to it over the years, and it's nowhere near perfect, but I like to think that it's a little better than when we first started. But it's the old saying though is like garbage in, garbage out, right?
Right.
A lot of the numbers you're putting in them, they're pretty subjective. The biggest one is the property value. That's it's an
It's through the roof, right?
so yeah, some people call it an art, some people call it a science, and if you don't nail that property value, then unless it's like a smaller balance loan and the property's worth way more than that, there's a ton of equity. But if you have to take that property back in foreclosure and you don't get that value down, that could make or break you on a lot of deals. So
Sure,
um,
sure.
yeah. So and estimating expenses is kind of tough as well. If you get a standard foreclosure and the legal fees and the court costs, if there's no rebuttal from the borrower, then it's the standard Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac guidelines. But if they start contesting it and legal fees start going up, then you could be into a deal for tens of thousands of dollars of legal fees that you haven't accounted for. So
Right.
um, Yeah. But, I would say like 80% of the time is pretty accurate. And then there's 20% of the time where it's like, oh man, I missed that one by a long slide. So,
Right.
yeah.
Well, it's kind of like I was reading Principles by Ray Dalio, the big
Yeah.
stock market investor, but he always talks about like the system that he had for buying stocks, and it was the same thing. He developed it over a long period of time, over many years,
Yeah.
constantly updating it and putting that info in to track those deals. And that's
Yeah.
something that like I'm a big proponent of for I talk to a lot of people who just want to get started in the business, and they got maybe a large 401k Roth IRA that they want to just go out, and they always want to do it themselves. And I'm not a big proponent of that, especially for maybe if you're going to do non-performing. Yeah, there's a lot of information out there, but you're not going to learn that all unless you do the deals. And a lot of people aren't going to put in that time to spend 5 or 6 years. So I always recommend them to partner with an investor. And I mean, I know
Yeah.
you offer people to partner with you. I mean, let's just say, for example, I mean, if I had $100,000, could I come to you and possibly schedule a call to invest with you? Or what type of opportunities do you allow people to invest with you?
Yeah. So, I get asked that fairly often. Um, I used to have, I would say I used to have, when I first started in the business, it's not like I would take anybody on, but, like I had my company's own capital, like because I've been in real estate for like since 2007, so built up a bit of a war chest of capital to play with. So the first like dozen deals that I did was my own cash, but at that at a certain point in time, you have to bring other investors on if you want to continue to grow, right? So
Sure.
the very beginning, yeah, I was bringing people on, and as part of a few different networks and groups, and like that were headed up by some gurus, if you want to call them that, I guess. And some of the people in these classes were, I guess they were just like a little bit scared to jump in with their own feet, even though they were getting all the same education as I was, but already been doing it, I guess. And
Yeah.
it's not like I joined. It's not like I was part of those classes. I guess I would just go to some of the networking events, whatever. But then I get some people that would say, "Hey, can we do a deal together?" So I would say, "Yeah, sure." And typical arrangement where they fund it and I do all the work basically, and split the proceeds based on what you negotiate up front. But so my criteria has changed a little bit over the years. Unless I know the person, and like I don't bring like close friends or family in, because there's nothing worse than doing a deal and it goes sideways, and you're sitting at Easter dinner and you're like, hey,
Yeah.
what
Grandmas.
happened to that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I'll bring in like acquaintances, I guess. But
Hmm.
the criteria I have is the person has to have some kind of real estate experience, or invested in some kind of real estate deal, or just invested in something, period. Like I want to see
Sure.
that they haven't, this is like their first investment they've ever done, and they have no idea what the outcome might be. So that's usually the number one requirement. And the second requirement is they have to have some kind of note investing education. So I'll make them say, listen, there's like a $500 course you can take on this. Please go and take this, because I'm not going to be holding your hand through this entire
Right.
process, like updating and all the steps that go through it. So that's pretty much the extent. So I don't bring people in now to teach them. It just takes way too long.
Sure.
Um, I've had a few over the years, and I'll be frank, I'm not a very good teacher. Like, I remember even back in like elementary school helping my sister do math, and I could never figure out how to teach her that she could understand. And I think it's the same way with these. It's like I just get kind of fed up. Um, so I want to have I want to bring people on that have an understanding of it, and they're not going to be, email me once a week and asking for updates and what have you. But and yeah, I do kind of have like a certain threshold minimum investment requirement now, and I don't say whether it's like 100 grand, but it's I just kind of say like, listen, put enough in where you can spread it over a couple of deals, so that if one
Sure.
goes not as planned, the other one kind of makes up for it. So, but yeah, so that's kind of how it works now. So, I've got a few fund investors as well that have some pretty deep pockets. So it's and they're actually they're probably more of a pain than some of the smaller investors, just obviously because they want to be updated and updated for their fund as well. And
Right.
I've also formed some couple other investors. We like a couple of group investors we formed, like separate entities that we invest through as well. So yeah, it's a kind of a myriad of arrangements that I've got, that have developed over the years. So
I got you. Cool. To touch on the point you were talking about, that not being a great teacher. Those who can't do teach, right? You're a doer. It's what I always tell people. People who tell
yeah,
me that, I used to work with a guy who he would try to show me stuff,
yeah,
and he's just a terrible teacher. I was like, look, man, you're a doer.
yeah. That's hilarious to say that. I say that all the time. Yeah, people
Yeah,
can do teach.
sure.
No offense to teachers, man. Like they're hardworking people as
No,
well. So,
yeah, my mom was a school teacher for like 40 years, so hopefully
oh
she
wow,
doesn't
okay,
doesn't listen to this. But
right,
yeah, let's talk about, we touched on a little bit about, right now notes are selling pretty high. Real estate
yeah,
market's pretty high. So even on my buy side, when I'm buying deals, it's like, man, these are getting a little expensive for my taste.
yeah,
But
yeah,
I mean, if you can, your 2 cents on current market predictions. I know, I've heard all different types of things. Some people think that just inflation is going to take, nothing is ever going to drop. Some people think it's going to be
yeah.
a big crash. I mean, current market predictions, your 2 cents of what you're seeing.
I'm probably in the prior camp, like where inflation's here and it's here to stay.
Yeah,
Or at least the inflation that's occurred so far is here to stay. So I got a couple of reasonings behind my belief in that. So not that I'm a huge follower in anybody in particular, but if I don't know if you ever get the Housing Wire news, it's called housingwire.com. They send
yeah,
out like daily newsletters, or I guess daily. And one of their, I don't know if it's the economist or editor in chief, I can't remember the exact title, but his name is Logan Motashami or something like that. But I've been following them for years and years and years, because they have some really good information. So this guy, like right when the pandemic started, or a couple months into it, everybody back then thought the world was going to collapse, everything's going to go down 50%. Obviously
sure.
it went the exact opposite direction. No one predicted that, the way it went. But I remember this guy in particular, like a couple months in, there's like the big wigs out there, like the Ken McElroys and um, not Poor Dad, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki. He wasn't one of them, but it was the guy that works with them. They're all calling these crashes, and they're all on YouTube. Well, this
Yeah,
guy Logan on Housing Wire, he's like, you know what? He called them the housing bubble boys or something like that. He's like, these guys they have got it completely wrong. So the millennial generation is the biggest cohorts of home buyers since the baby boomers. They're all going to be in their prime buying years over the next 3 to 4 years, and inventory is dropping. So, he kept making these cases, and, I'm an engineer originally. So, he puts all these in nice graphical format. You can follow along, and I'm like, this guy's he's going against the tide. He's going against the grain, and he is really going out on a limb by predicting that housing is just going to keep going up through the pandemic. And
sure.
I didn't really believe him at first, but man, he hit the nail right on the head, like right on it. Like he predicted almost as much, as depreciation as it actually happened. And he's still very, very bullish on housing. So anyhow, he's one guy I kind of follow and believe in his background or his facts that back it up. But as I was saying before, the inflation that's taken hold, there's trillions of dollars that pumped into the economy, like trillions and trillions of dollars. A lot of that went into housing. During the last recession, yeah, a lot of money was pumped into the economy, but it didn't go into housing, and it just sat in bank accounts. It sat, banks weren't lending it out, so that's why inflation didn't. Or that's one of the reasons I believe inflation didn't take hold back then. But whereas it now, everybody saved, kept it, and or put it into buying new housing. Interest rates have gone down to rock bottom prices. And, the government's kind of in between a rock and a hard place now, where, yeah, inflation's starting to take hold. So they're going to need to start jacking up interest rates, but they can't, because if they can't jack them up too much, because if they do, they're going to be shooting themselves in the foot, because all the debt that they've created over if you go back to the last recession, last decade and a half, there is going to start costing a lot more to service that debt. So they're only going to be able to creep interest rates up very, very gradually. There's not going to be like one day where we wake up and say, oh, the central bank just raised interest rates by 1%, which happened, 10, 20 years ago. That's never going to happen again. It's going to be quarter percent increments. So yeah, house prices keep going up, but they're going to start leveling off eventually, because affordability is starting to reach that point where people only look at monthly payments. They don't really look at the house price. But one of these days, the psychology is going to set in and say, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm buying a $600,000 house where last 5 years ago was only worth $200,000, right?" So
Right.
So that's kind of a long answer to your question. I think things are just going to level off eventually, and it's going to be the status quo from now on. So
Yeah, I mean that's kind of more of the opinion that I was just going with. Like I was talking with my brother the other day, and like the inflation is the big contributing factor that people aren't looking at, who are calling like an '08 recession. I mean, if we look at like the biggest time inflation the states had in the last 80 years, I mean, it was 1970 to 1980, and I
yeah,
think it was massive inflation. But I mean, average house price in 1969 was like $16,000. Average house price in 1980 was like 65,000. That never
yeah,
came back down. Like
right,
no house was ever came back on the market for 16,000, right?
right,
So I think you're right. Yeah, I think it's definitely going to be, there could be a little bit of a dip, kind of like we saw, 18 months ago. But I think overall, yeah, inflation is going to take hold.
yeah,
But you never know, man.
yeah. It's like one day to the next, you never know exactly. So
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, I think no, that's a good analogy, using the '70s. Like that's a pretty good stat. I did see that not long ago about how prices in the '60s. It was actually it was like an article or something like that. That I can't remember what magazine. It was, like The Economist or something like that. So they're
Mhm.
showing the headlines and some of the snippets from this article, and they're comparing it. They said, "Can you believe this was 50 years ago? They were saying this exactly what's happening right now. Like how pricing is going through the roof, and
Right.
just a couple of years ago, the price is worth like half of what it was now." And this, it was an article. I'm pretty sure it was an Economist magazine or something like that. That
Right.
whoever was blogging about it pulled it out of. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So, but
Yeah. It never comes back down. I mean, you can't stop
yeah,
inflation.
right, yeah, exactly. So
Well, let's have, I do like to have a little bit of fun. It looks like we're coming to the end of it, but what's your most embarrassing story for real estate investing? It could be on any level, just for a little bit of fun, if you don't mind sharing that.
embarrassing story. Oh man, like,
Most embarrassing
oh
story,
Jesus.
or biggest flop.
Oh, biggest flop. Well,
Do that.
I've had quite a few, unfortunately, over the years, but I chalk those up as learning experiences, right? Like,
Right. You're
um,
not successful if you don't fail, man. If someone says that they never failed, they never tried, right?
yeah, exactly. It's so the one thing I love about real estate is it's not like a stock market. If you pick a stock, it's a good chance it could go to zero tomorrow. Like look at Enron, right? You plow
Right.
100 grand in Enron, it could be worth zero the next day if the CEO turns out to be a total fraud. In real estate, it's not. It's very slim chance going to go to zero. Now it does, and it's happened to me. Buying a note where it got sold in a tax sale, and the title company completely missed it. And we buy the loans, and you don't find out it's sold in the tax sale for like 3-4 months later, and you're out whatever you paid for that note.
They didn't have like the title insurance on that. That didn't cover it.
No, like most of the vendors, like typically the vendors in this industry, they just like it's like an as is basis, or
I
it's
gotcha.
or it's not called as
You
is,
got to
but it's
do
like
it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
You got to
yeah,
do
yeah,
your
yeah.
own.
So yeah, so this and when well in that particular situation, they refunded us the cost of reports, and it was paled in comparison how much we lost on the deal that we lost. But
Sure.
so and that was with one of our fund investors, so that was kind of a tough pill to swallow when I had to go back and say it to him. Yeah, I remember that. Well, it was a pool of like a whole bunch of them, but yeah, I think we paid 12 grand or something for it. Yeah,
It's not too bad.
we lost we lost the entire that loan level amount.
All right.
Yeah, so yeah, that was a bit of a sore point. So back in my buying foreclosure days, probably one of my first deals I ever bought. From the outside, the house looked beautiful. This is in South Florida. It was in Miami, like West Miami. It was in a gated community, maybe 10-year-old house. So picked it up. It was probably worth like 250, I think, at the time. It's probably worth like 700 now. But
Wow.
but this was back in like 2012, 2013. I think we bought it at the foreclosure auction for like 160, I'm going to say, somewhere around there. Any event, we had to evict the guy out of the house. That took an extra 2-3 months. He ended up ripping the air handler unit out and all the copper. So, it was not in very good shape by the time we took this thing over. Well, the worst part was the guy was raising dogs, like puppies. So he was
Yeah.
running a puppy mill in the house. And I'd never seen so much urine and feces in my life. It was the most disgusting thing I'd ever seen. It was so bad that we had to actually rip out. Well, we didn't, but we sold it to someone else that ended up having to replace all the subflooring. But what we had to do is take out all the drywall because like about a foot or two was like just like soaked in urine and
Oh my goodness.
yeah, that was that was definitely an eye opener. It took a bit of a hit on that one too. I mean, it wasn't that big of a hit, but
Sure.
but those are some of the
That's
I guess we don't call it embarrassing. So.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. Normally, like that happened on that level of a house, like higher income house. I mean, I knew a guy who did Section 8 up in Cleveland, where I grew up.
Yeah.
About 12, 15 houses, all Section 8. So like, he got a call one day, tenant moving out. He said, "Why are you moving out?" He said, "Well, it smells like feces and pet urine in here." And he's like,
Yeah.
"Well, it was clean like when you got in there." And when the guy moved out, like his dogs would just do that. He would never
Yeah.
clean them. So
Yeah.
once he
Yeah.
was done renting, he just moved out. And it's like unbelievable. So that's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just like
Yeah.
it's sad people do that, but you know,
Yeah. Well, that's pretty common actually, especially when we take back foreclosures. But this one in particular, he was actually raising dogs in the house, and you can see the outline of the cages and the
yeah,
crates and stuff. And it wasn't
yeah.
just one room; it was the entire house. And it's like, oh man.
Oh, that's
Um,
rough,
but
man.
uh, but I've got one. I've actually got one even worse story than that. This one was it was a foreclosure. We took it back. Same thing. We had to evict the guy, and then he actually broke back in 3 times. Like he kept breaking the lock and moving back in. Yes, it was a crazy story.
He really
But
liked the house, man. Come on.
well, I don't know why he did because once we finally got in there, same thing. He's letting his dogs and Cassis run amok, and he had his elderly mother living with them as well. And
Ooh,
I think she was laid up like in bed, and
yeah.
she was like had to wear like adult diapers and what have you. They
Huh.
were all strewn all over the house. Like,
Ah,
so yeah. So I had hired this property manager to go in once we finally got possession of it. Like the sheriff had to go in and evict them, and when the sheriff was there, like they make sure you have to have somebody that moves up furniture, someone to change the locks. So you have to have 4 or 5 people there to take care of everything. Well, the guy
mhm.
that was the property manager was going to clean the house out. He was walking through it, and he was gagging while he was telling me about it on the cell phone, and he had to run outside and toss his cookies. That's how bad it was. So
Oh man, that's a good
yeah,
thing you weren't there, right? That's why I hire
yeah,
people
no,
to do it for you. Yeah.
that's the beauty of this business is you never have to be there. But yeah, that one in particular, the city had also condemned it because it was it's a long story, but we had to hire a hazmat crew to come in and clean the place out, and it was like something like 5 or 6 grand, I think. So yeah, the
Holy
people had to
smokes,
wear hazmat suits. Yeah. So
that is
yeah,
unbelievable.
there's a lot of surprises in this business. So nothing really surprises me anymore. Well, I shouldn't say that. I think nothing's going to surprise me, and then it's like, oh man, here we go again. So
Here we go.
yeah, but
Well, shoot, let's build you up a little bit, and let's talk about your greatest deal, your greatest success. We can end on
um,
that.
yeah. So well, as mentioned, we just sold a couple of reperformers, and those were I'm pretty sure they're both over
Over
100%
100.
return. But I've had quite a few of those. The best deal, I'm not going to throw any numbers, not going to share any out, but
Right.
ended up making 10 times the investment. So, yeah, so it was a
Nice.
pretty good one. Yeah. But like I've got a few where like I'm selling a property, just signed the paperwork today where we're going to be losing 50% on it. The property just ended up being way like it actually needs to be condemned. So, Like the house is worth like basically the land that it's on. So, but yeah, so anywhere from that's probably gonna be the biggest percent loss, 50%. Well, no, 100% was the one we lost in the tax deed sale, but
Right.
that was a smaller number. But this one was, like I said, probably lose about 20,000 on it. But yeah, then all the way up to making 10 times. Another
Sure.
deal made 7 or 8 times my money. Yeah, so everything in between, right? So as long as the good deals outweigh the bad deals, by 3 or 4 to 1 margin, then you're usually in the black in this business. So
Sure, sure. Well, that's a big thing. I think a lot of people try to focus on one deal, and that's not how it's done. You got to have a portfolio. You got to have plenty of deal flow, right? To
yeah,
overall
yeah,
work it.
yeah,
That's just how the
exactly.
business works.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So I usually shoot for anywhere between a 20 and 40% return. It's kind of like the target. So
Right, right.
some are better and some are worse, and usually they fall within that range. So
Yeah. A lot better than the stock market, man. Even in the bull market, right?
yeah, yeah. At least it's somewhat predictable. That's what I like about it, right? It's you're probably going to coming within close of what your projections are. So
Right, right.
yeah.
Well, shoot, man. It looks like that's all the time we got for today, but it was an honor as well as a pleasure having you on here this evening. I really appreciate you joining me. Unless you got anything else you want to add.
No, I
Before we
just
sign off.
that's about it as well. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it, and yeah, look forward to hearing some of your podcasts as well. So.